In today's video, we're going to head out and shoot some minimalist street photography in DDP. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is Dylan Golby. In today's video, we're going to head downtown to the Dongdaemun Design Plaza and shoot some minimalist street photography. This is something I've been meaning to do for a while since I've started reading Zen Camera. Now, if you haven't seen my video on that, I'll put a link up here for you. But basically, the concept is to shoot things for yourself and shoot things just by observing the world and sort of enjoying what it is that's there and capturing it in the way that you see fit. So I'm going to head down today and be looking at things like light and lines and shapes. The Dongdaemun Design Plaza is a building that was designed by Zaha Hadid, and so it's very sort of curvy. It's got a lot of repeating patterns. It's got some crisscrossing architecture that's really, really interesting. And especially during the middle of the day when the light is sort of coming down from above, it creates these little patches all the way through it. So I thought I'd head down, and it's one of the locations in Seoul that is simple. It's a very complicated, very busy city with a lot of people, a lot of buildings. There's just things everywhere. But the DDP, the Dongdaemun Design Plaza, is a bit simpler, and it allows for these sort of minimalist compositions. And the light that we get there, as I said, also sort of helps to lend towards that. And it's one of the few locations in the city where the light just sort of works all day. So with that said, let's pack the bag and head out. Welcome to downtown Seoul. We're in DDP right now, the Dongdaemun Design Plaza, and this has basically two parts to it. One is a very modern building by Zaha Hadid, and it's sort of really out of place in this area of the town. And what you see behind me is actually part of the old city wall that was dug up when the stadium that was here previously was actually knocked down. So the stadium had a flea market in it, and of course, obviously, they used to do sports there as well, but they knocked that guy down and built this building, and in the process found a whole lot of the old city of Seoul under here, and part of that is this. So I'm here today with the X100V. I'm going to do a little bit of a walk around, and like as I said, my goal is just to try and get some very minimal, very stark looking things. This building kind of lends itself to that. It's all very geometric, and it's one of the places in Seoul where, you know, light actually looks good at all times of day. So when you get to midday, it sort of comes down in the cracks between. It's a very sort of an egg-shaped building with a whole lot of other pillars and walkways and things on it. So the light comes down and forms these really interesting patterns. And so I'm going to try and explore those a little bit. I haven't been here for a while, so it's going to be a good exercise for me to try and go home with, 10 or 15 frames that are just really, really minimal. And the great thing today is that we have blasting sunlight coming down, so there's going to be a lot of people walking around with sunbrellas, basically. So a lot of people here try to keep their skin very, very pale, and so they'll walk around with an umbrella on bright sunny days and just try and keep the sun off themselves. So that becomes a very interesting graphic element in a place like this. So those should be interesting. And then we've also got some clouds in the sky, so hopefully there'll be a bit of softer light here and there as well. So I'm going to do a walk around, try and get my bearings, figure out where the light is right now, and find a spot to stop and shoot. Okay, so first little scene here is a pretty common one to shoot in this area. I think you see quite a few photos of it. It offers a lot of possibilities. So one of the things that I am going to do today is I'm going to try and shoot black and white JPEGs. And so I'll be shooting RAW plus JPEG, but I do have quite an aggressive tone curve. So I've got +3 on the shadows and +1 on the highlights, just to give it a little more contrast. And I'm using the standard black and white with a red filter, just to try and really give this place some contrast. And the one thing that I am noticing actually is that because there's so low contrast, or the sun comes out again just now, but when there is low contrast, the X100 really struggles to focus here because there's just nothing for it to latch onto. So I really do need that person dressed in black, like we've got coming out just now, to really give it enough contrast to latch onto and be able to focus. With the tiles on the floor, it just isn't able to focus without that. When the sun's out though, you can always focus on the edge of light there. So what I'm thinking here is I want to try to explore this from sort of up high, maybe a little bit down low like this, maybe sort of go very minimal like this. Of course, this is a little bit wider on the GoPro and it'll be a little bit tighter on the X100, but there's also the possibility to sort of come around here and make use of these lines, sort of something more like that, or looking down here for something a bit more minimal. You can also go vertical. We've also got a gentleman walking along up the top here, so I'll be able to get something maybe a little bit more like that. One of the other great things about this building is these sort of explosions of light that you get from the entrances. Because all the edges are round, it just sort of nicely tapers off and gives you some really interesting light to work with. So I hang out here for a little bit and try and get something roughly like this. Now it's lunchtime, there's a few more people around, and I'm going to try and make a composition involving these beams. Now, things I want to keep out of it are the signage behind, some of the signs to the left and right. The glass might become a bit of an issue, but we'll see how we go. Yellow line won't matter, it's in black and white. And so I'm just going to try and have a bit of another minimal composition with some interesting light. Hopefully the clouds will pass and we'll get some harsh light as well. The light doesn't seem like it's going to come back. It's pretty cloudy now. I've decided to start playing with these different lines. So I'm just walking around trying to put some foreground in, put some background in, and see if I can't get people, or there's a few pigeons flying around. Maybe we'll get something with those as well. So basically just playing a bit of a dance with these lines and seeing what interesting frames I can make. Speak of the devil and all of that, I said the sun wasn't going to come back out, and the moment I did that, it came straight back out, and we've got these beautiful cuts and slashes of light on the ground, and they're making for really interesting patterns. So I've got this one on the bottom left of the frame here right now, and I'm trying to basically just wait for something to happen in those slashes of light. The things that I am trying to, oh, excuse me, sir. The things that I am trying to avoid are that second patch of light that you can see there, and of course, the sky and the buildings that you'll be able to see if you look from down here. So basically trying to get those out of the composition, keep it nice and clean, and just have it be about these two patches of light. So some storm clouds have rolled in, and I think we're about to get absolutely dumped on, so I'm going to jump on the bus and head home, but I wanted to wrap up with just a few thoughts about today. And I think the first one is that, I mentioned in my review that I didn't really care for the flipping or the tilting screen on this camera, but I think today, honestly, just because of the amount of sort of high barriers between me and things, that has become absolutely invaluable today. Even if I can only flip just that much, it's just enough to be able to, get the reflections and glare off the screen. The other thing is that it's really difficult to compose when there's this much light on the screen and you can't just put it to your eye. So, everything basically reflects in the screen when it's bright, and I don't have the best eyes in bright light anyway, so for me I'm sort of squinting the whole time just trying to get a view of the screen. So I've missed a few compositions and added in a few things that I didn't want to have in there, but of course I've got the raw files so I can crop those. The other things, working in black and white is a lot of fun. I've done a video on that before. It's just a great way to sort of view the world in a slightly different way. Just focus on textures and lines and compositions rather than on, colors that might be distracting. So, for example, today if somebody's wearing a red jacket, it really doesn't matter. It doesn't stand out in the composition because it just sort of goes black, when I actually take it in black and white. So, that's been really good and a really fun exercise. And it's been really interesting to, just visit this place. It's so close to home and I so rarely come here. I haven't really been here that often since it actually opened, so it's just kind of fun to walk around and just see it with new eyes and see it in different light. And I think that's a good point as well, is that, I've spent probably 2 or 2.5 hours here today, and spending that time, giving yourself the openness, the patience to watch light change, to see different people walk through your scene, to sit there and just have a bottle of water because it's just so hot, and then while you're doing that, see a composition that you may not have seen before because you're just sitting in a different place, or a cloud blew in and covered up part of the light or something like that. So that's been really good as well. So patience, shooting in black and white, and also just that little flip screen. So that's been really good. So I'll head back now and copy the images over, and if there's anything particularly interesting that I want to talk about, we'll throw them up on the screen and just talk a little bit of composition together. So we'll see you back home. Here we are back in the office. It's been good to sit in the air conditioning for a while, a couple of cold glasses of water, a new shirt after hanging out in the sun that whole time. And I've had a chance to look over the images, and there's a few things that I do want to talk about in terms of just my approach to how I was creating them and what I was trying to create. And so I think the first thing that I want to talk about is with relation to this image here, which you did see me shoot while we were out there. This is much softer light than what I showed you in the video, I think. Cloud had come over and given us a nice patch of soft light to work with. And so the one thing that I noticed with this scene is that while it sort of worked, and this is a very good representation of the architecture and sort of what it looks like, what I really wanted to achieve with this was a bit more of a dramatic, dynamic, sort of minimalistic sort of feeling. So this was one of the times where I did use the wide-angle conversion lens, and so I had both conversion lenses with me, but the telephoto conversion lens I found tended to force me to step back a little bit too far, and so you sort of lose the dramatic lines and angles in the building as you start to step back, and it sort of gets that compressed kind of feeling. So what this does is it allows you to step that little bit closer and sort of basically have, whatever's close to you be a little bit larger, whatever's further away be a little bit smaller, and so it sort of stretches out lines and gives you a bit more of a dramatic feeling to the building. So if you take this scene, for example, and then move over to the next frame, which is with the wide-angle conversion lens, sort of what it does is it forces you to look up at the building a little bit more, so you sort of, things get a little bit stretched out this way, things get a little bit stretched out this way, and it just gives it a bit more of a dynamic feeling, which I sort of liked for this scene, and so I made a bit more use of this than I did of the teleconverter. With this next frame, the thing that I want to talk about is using light as sort of an implied line. Now, this building has a whole lot of different lines of its own. This walkway goes all the way around here like this, but if I were to include that whole thing as a line, it would become an extremely wide, extremely large frame. And so thankfully I had the sun cutting across here and just casting a nice harsh shadow down there to sort of form this implied line that goes around the building here. So what I was trying to do there was just basically make use of the light, play to its strengths, and use it to make my composition work. The next thing I want to talk about with this frame is choosing a bit more of an in-between moment. Now, we don't always have to capture that perfect apex of a moment. Sometimes the in-between, where something's not quite finished or sort of awkwardly starting, can actually tell a bit more of a story than that perfect moment. And so, as I mentioned, people here use umbrellas a lot under the sun, and they make for a really nice graphic element, that sort of curve, especially when you're dealing with a building like this, which has got a lot of straight lines and a lot of sort of geometric patterns and things like that. Having that sort of beautiful curve just to break it all up can be really nice. But I feel like an image like this, where that umbrella is sort of, being half opened, tells you a little bit about the way people move from shade to sunlight here. So if you ever walk out of a building or a metro station or something in Korea, you'll often see just quite a few people fiddling with their umbrellas in the doorway or in the entrance to the metro, trying to get them open before they get hit by the sun. And so this, for me, talks a little bit more about the culture of umbrellas here and tells a little bit more of that story. While we're talking about moments, I want to talk a little bit about footfall. This is something that's really important to me in, say, my couple or family sessions. If I have, my couples and my families walking along, I don't want sort of awkwardly placed feet or people looking like they're about to fall over or things like that. And those in-between moments while you're walking can actually create that. So I'm always looking for a few specific things when it comes to footfall, and that also applies to street photography like this. So for example, this image here, what you're seeing is what I would call sort of an awkward footfall. This is that sort of I'm not sure if I'm walking or falling type of thing. Whereas if you look at the next one, the foot has gone forward and the back foot is starting to lift off the ground. And for me, that's a lot more natural. It's a lot more expressive of a human who knows how to walk doing that particular activity. And then if you look at the next one again, you get sort of a bit more of an awkward thing again. It's almost like the foot is falling, like they're being pulled by gravity. And then the next one, you're getting that beautiful triangle between the legs. So that's a little bit more expressive of somebody who knows how to walk again. And so the way that I approach this is to basically frame up my composition, focus, get my exposure, and then as somebody's roughly in the right position that I want them in the frame, I will then start, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and just make quite a few frames to make sure that I get the correct footfall while they're in the right place in the frame. And so, digital photography helps us to do that because we can literally just shoot quite a few and then choose the best expression of that. And, a lot of the times you get exactly what you're after, and sometimes you get quite surprised by something that happens. So that's generally the way that I approach subjects that are walking. Now back to this scene with the curve of light. Now the other thing that I wanted to talk about with this scene was I think our obsession with dynamic range. Now camera manufacturers have given us these tools with 14, 15, 16 stops of dynamic range, and you can pull your highlights and shadows every which way and basically create an image that's completely removed from reality. And then, software manufacturers have done the same thing and said, well, that's not quite enough. If you make multiple exposures, we can give you absolutely every screed of detail that you could possibly want. And I think that, while that sort of stuff has its place, it does get abused quite a little bit, but it does have a place in things like, certain types of landscape photography where you're able to get something that's a little bit more like what the human eye would see rather than what a camera will typically capture. But when it comes to things like street photography or documentary photography, I find that we're often looking for something a little bit more gritty, a little bit more high contrast. And so just completely removing, saying, well, I only need 4 stops of dynamic range can give us a really interesting look to our images. And so that's something that I was trying to do with this scene. And so in this first one, I'm exposing for my highlights, making sure I've got detail in those, and letting the shadows kind of fall into a bit of darkness. And you can still see a little bit of detail, but not a lot. But the other thing that I did try and do when somebody was walking through that shaded area was to actually expose for the shadows. And so you get this really sort of blown out, there's basically no detail at all in these highlights, and it gives you this really sort of stark kind of feeling. Like I said, I was looking for a bit of a stark kind of harsh feeling to this place. And so for somebody like me also who has difficulty opening their eyes on a bright sunny day and has to wear sunglasses all the time, this is pretty much how I see the world if I take my sunglasses off. So it's a pretty interesting different way of looking at this building. And I think that if we start embracing the fact that there are multiple ways to expose things and there's not really a right or a wrong, then we can start to come up with, more interesting types of exposures. You don't have to have detail in absolutely everything. You can say, well, I want you to look at this, and if I expose in this way, I can kind of make you look at that. And in this case, your eyes are going to go straight to those dark trousers on the underside of the umbrella where there's a whole lot of contrast to sort of make you look there. For those of you who have been paying attention to the settings that I've put under each of these images, you might have noticed that every photo in this video has been shot at either f5.6 or f8. And the reason for that is that basically, I was looking for detail, depth of field, and just having, sharp lines and things like that in my frames. I wasn't really looking to get creative with depth of field and things like that, and I had enough light where for the most part I really didn't need to go anywhere lower than f5.6, and I could still use my base ISO. So that really wasn't a concern for me. Now you might have noticed there were a few images in there with one scene where my ISO was up around 1250 or 1600 and we're in bright daylight, and the reason for that was that I'd actually been shooting in the really bright daylight and I'd forgotten to turn my ND filter off, and so the ISOs got ramped up a little bit. But again, not really a concern. ISO 1250, ISO 1600 on these cameras is just fine. And I wasn't really too worried about there being a little bit of noise created. In black and white especially, you know, it doesn't really make much of a difference. And as I said, I wasn't really trying to use all the dynamic range that the sensor had available. So, you know, for me, it really wasn't a concern. So as always, thank you guys for sticking with me until the end. I hope that this video has been a little bit educational or entertaining, or hopefully both. I've got a slideshow of some of my favorite images. There are a few extras and also some of the ones you've already seen coming up after this. And they'll be on the screen for a little bit longer, and all the settings will be there so you can check those out. So if you have a favorite image in the slideshow, please do let me know in the comments. If you haven't subscribed already, I'd really appreciate that as well. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks again.